I stepped into the banquet hall, bathed in dazzling lights, where everything exuded such opulence that it bordered on ostentation. The crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto the soft silk tablecloths, while the elegantly dressed guests raised their champagne glasses with pride. This was not a place I ever thought I would set foot in, not a place for someone who had been cast aside by her own family. But here I was, at the lavish wedding of Sophia, my younger sister. The very person who, 12 years ago, had watched me walk out of our home with cold, unfeeling eyes, without a hint of hesitation. I was not on the guest list. Of course not. Someone who had been erased from the family at 18 had no reason to show up at this perfectly curated event. But fate has a way of playing cruel jokes, and tonight was the moment I had been waiting for over a decade. Walking among the powerful and privileged, I could feel the stares burning into me, the whispers rippling through the air like waves. Naturally, I was no longer that quiet, invisible girl who silently endured their contempt. At that moment, a voice laced with disdain cut through the elegant atmosphere. "What is this, Catherine?" I turned my head and met the sharp gaze of my mother, Margaret, a woman who had never once shown me affection. She smirked, lifting her glass of champagne with a smug expression. "What is that useless girl doing here?" I kept my smile intact. It had been a long time since I had last heard her speak about me, and yet her voice still carried the same dismissive disgust, as if I were an unwanted stain on her perfect life. Sophia stood beside my mother, arms crossed, lips curling into a mocking smirk. Her extravagant wedding gown made her look like the perfect princess in everyone's eyes, but I knew the truth about Sophia. "You're not on the guest list," she said haughtily, loud enough for those nearby to stop and turn toward us. But before anyone could react, another voice rang out, this time filled with shock and a trace of fear. "Wait, she's..." The one who spoke was Daniel, Sophia's fiancé. His face suddenly turned pale, his eyes widening as he looked at me like he had just seen a ghost from the past. I raised an eyebrow, stepping toward him slowly, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. "Do you really not know anything, Daniel?" My voice was soft, but the weight of my words was undeniable. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence. Sophia furrowed her brows, glancing at her fiancé, as if sensing something was terribly wrong. I did not rush. I simply stood there, letting the silence stretch, allowing their gazes to remain fixated on me, waiting for everything to begin unraveling. Just as the flawless wedding Sophia had meticulously crafted was about to shatter. Daniel took a step back, his complexion visibly paling. I remained still, quietly observing the reactions of my family, the very people who had once turned their backs on me without hesitation. A part of me wanted to savor this moment longer, but I wasn't in a hurry. Because before they could fully comprehend what was happening, I wanted them to remember the night that had changed my life forever. 12 years ago, I stood at my front door, the biting cold of a New York winter night cutting through me like a blade. Snowflakes drifted silently, covering the streets in a pristine white layer that starkly contrasted with the darkness weighing down my heart. My old, battered suitcase rested at my feet, holding only a few pieces of clothing and the small belongings I had managed to grab. The door slammed shut behind me without hesitation. I remembered my mother's final words, not spoken in anger nor sorrow, but with chilling indifference. "You are worthless to this family. I've put up with you long enough." And my father? He said very little. He simply stood there, arms crossed, allowing my mother to make the decision, just like always. And Sophia, just 17 at the time, stood with her arms folded, smirking like she had just won a battle she had been waging for years. No tears, no last-minute pleas, only the freezing wind hitting my face as I stepped away from that door. A door I knew I would never be allowed to walk through again. I wandered the streets with no idea where to go, no money, no close friends I could turn to, and no one from my family called to check if I was even still alive. I curled up in the corner of an alley next to a small diner in Brooklyn, where the warmth from the kitchen vents kept me from freezing. The first night, I prayed for morning to come quickly. By the second night, I began to understand that if I didn't do something, I wouldn't survive this winter. The next morning, just as I was about to leave in search of a better place to stay, the diner's back door swung open. A middle-aged woman with graying hair tied into a tight bun stepped out. Rita, the owner of the diner. She looked at me with narrowed, calculating eyes. "If you're planning on staying here all night, at least make yourself useful." I looked up, surprised. She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't show pity. She simply tossed me a rag. "Get in the kitchen and clean up. You can eat when you're done." I didn't hesitate. I had no right to refuse. From that day on, I did every job in the diner. Cleaning, serving, washing dishes, whatever Rita asked of me. I slept in a small storage room behind the kitchen, surrounded by sacks of flour and boxes of supplies. It wasn't comfortable, but at least it had a roof, an old mattress, and, most importantly, it held a sliver of hope. Every night I studied by the dim light in the storage room. I refused to let my life revolve around this kitchen forever. I wanted more. I applied for a scholarship to a business school. I knew the chances were slim, but I had nothing to lose. A few months later, when I received my acceptance letter, I collapsed onto the diner's kitchen floor and cried. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. The college years passed in a blur of early morning classes, late-night shifts, and countless sleepless nights spent studying. But by the time I graduated, I knew everything had changed. I was no longer the abandoned girl wandering the winter streets. I had become someone they could never have imagined. At 27, I founded my own nutrition company, Catherine Health, a brand specializing in clean supplements and functional foods. I understood the struggles of those who had once been hungry, who had counted every cent just to afford a meal. And that understanding was what fueled my company's success. Within just 5 years, Catherine Health expanded across dozens of states in the U.S. My products filled the shelves of major retailers, were recommended by doctors, and even appeared in business magazines. And yet, in all those years, not a single person from my family reached out. No messages, no calls, not even a fleeting inquiry about whether I was alive. I had become a stranger to them, and that was perfectly fine. Or at least, I thought so. Back at Sophia's wedding, I looked at Daniel, her fiancé, and let a slow smile spread across my face. "You know who I am, don't you?" I asked, my voice light as air. Daniel didn't answer, but I saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the fear. He knew, and that meant I had not been forgotten. The only problem was, they were never prepared to see me again. Daniel still hadn't spoken, but his face said it all. The entire ballroom was now focused on me, their eyes filled with curiosity and unease. I could sense Sophia's pulse quicken as she glanced at her fiancé, then back at me, her lips pressing into a tight line. I remained composed. In a deep blue evening gown that hugged my frame perfectly, my hair swept up in an elegant bun, I was nothing like the girl they had cast aside years ago. I could see them struggling to process it, trying to understand how Catherine, the worthless daughter they abandoned, could stand before them with such poise and authority. "Daniel," I spoke slowly, locking eyes with him. "You know who I am, don't you?" Daniel swallowed hard, his grip tightening around his wineglass until his knuckles turned white. He barely had time to react before Sophia stepped forward, inserting herself between us, her voice sharp and cold. "Why are you here?" she hissed, trying to regain control. "Are you here to beg for forgiveness? Or to steal attention on my big day?" I smiled, a sharp, deliberate smile. "Forgiveness?" I tilted my head. "I think you're mistaken, Sophia." I met her arrogant gaze, letting her see exactly what she had failed to notice all these years. I was no longer the abandoned child they had discarded. There was nothing to beg for. I had come to show them the truth they had worked so hard to bury. "Catherine?" A steady voice called my name from behind. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, my husband, stepped beside me, placing a firm yet gentle hand on my back, a silent declaration. No theatrics, no unnecessary words. Just his presence alone was enough for everyone to sense the power and success I carried with me now. Ethan was a highly accomplished businessman, the man I had built my life with over the years. But more than that, he was the only person who had witnessed every effort, every pain, and every moment of growth that had led me to this point. And now he stood beside me, a quiet statement that I was no longer someone to be dismissed. Sophia rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Oh, so you found someone stupid enough to believe in you? How pathetic." She lifted her chin, her mocking gaze sweeping over Ethan. But I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. "You think just because you married some rich guy, you're suddenly on my level." I blinked slowly, keeping my voice composed. "On your level, Sophia?" I let out a quiet chuckle. "If I remember correctly, you're the one who built a perfect little lie to deceive everyone here, aren't you?" I saw her expression darken. "What are you talking about?" I calmly reached into my clutch, pulling out a neatly folded document. I held it up, steady and deliberate. "This is your academic record from medical school," I said, my tone as light as ever, but each word struck her like a knife. "Or rather, the proof that you were expelled in your second year." A heavy silence fell over the ballroom. Sophia froze. For a split second, pure panic flashed across her face before she quickly masked it. "You're lying." "Am I?" I shrugged, turning to Daniel. "If you don't believe me, feel free to check for yourself. Surely you wouldn't want to marry someone who doesn't even have a legitimate degree, right?" Daniel stiffened. It was clear this was the first time he was hearing any of this. "Sophia?" His voice was hoarse, filled with doubt. "Tell me she's lying." Sophia whipped around, snapping at him. "Of course she is. Don't listen to her." But it was too late. The sheer panic in her eyes had already exposed the truth. And I wasn't finished yet. "Not only did you lie about graduating," I continued, my voice eerily calm, "but you also deceived the medical system, your patients, and even your own fiancé." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I slowly placed another document on the table. "Your medical license, Sophia, or should I say, your fake medical license." This time, the murmurs in the crowd erupted into full-blown whispers. I could see Dr. Matthews, a renowned physician and someone my family once boasted about knowing, standing at a distance, his face a mask of shock. Daniel slowly picked up the paper, skimmed through it, then abruptly looked at Sophia with disappointment. "You forged documents to pretend to be a doctor?" Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out, because she knew. She had lost. And I knew this show was just beginning. Daniel stared at the paper in his hands, the trust he once had for Sophia now replaced with doubt and disillusionment. The entire ballroom was drowning in heavy silence, broken only by the growing whispers of the guests. They were beginning to realize that the grand wedding they were attending was not a fairy tale, but a disaster about to explode before their eyes. Sophia tried to regain her composure, but I could see her hands trembling. "You think a meaningless piece of paper like this can ruin me?" Her voice was defiant, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her. "Daniel, don't believe her. She's just trying to stir up drama." Daniel slowly shook his head. "But you never told me about this, Sophia. If it's all a lie, why do you look so nervous?" Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I slowly reached into my clutch and pulled out a small USB, holding it up for everyone in the ballroom to see. "Sophia, did you really think all I had was a single document?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in my eyes. "No, I came prepared for much more than that." The entire room fell silent. I could see Margaret, my mother, clutching her champagne glass so tightly that her fingers turned pale. Richard, my father, sat motionless at the table, his jaw clenched, a clear sign that he knew what was coming. I turned to Daniel. "Do you have a laptop here?" Daniel looked up, blinking a few times as if trying to process everything happening around him. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, over at the sound booth." I turned on my heel. walking slowly toward the DJ's station where a laptop rested on the control panel. I didn't need to say a word. Daniel followed me, as if some part of him already knew that something far worse was coming. Sophia panicked. Daniel stopped, but it was too late. Daniel took the USB from my hand and plugged it into the laptop. The large projector screen behind the stage lit up. Files began appearing one by one. I pressed a key and document after document opened. Financial records, bank statements, undeniable proof of money being funneled into untraceable accounts. And then the insurance records from Morelli Family Care Clinic, the very clinic my family had been running for over a decade. I turned back to my father. Dad, did you really think no one would uncover your fraudulent medical claims? The entire room turned to look at Richard. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his face pale as a sheet. You don't know what you're talking about, Catherine. His voice was unsteady, but I wasn't going to let him manipulate his way out of this. I pressed another key and the screen displayed a financial report. Clear evidence that my father had been using my identity to evade taxes for over a decade. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged wary glances. I looked at my father, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. You used my social security number to file fake income reports, create fraudulent tax deductions, and launder money through your clinic, I said, pausing for a moment before tilting my head. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Margaret shot up from her seat. You're lying. No one will believe you. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I turned back to Daniel. This isn't just some minor financial scandal, I said. If you look closely, you'll see that Sophia's involved too. She stole another intern's identity to issue prescriptions and collect insurance payouts. Daniel didn't say a word. He turned to Sophia, his face filled with pain. You lied to me about all of this? His voice was hoarse. Sophia frantically shook her head. No, it's all lies. I let out a quiet chuckle. If you're so sure, then why don't you explain what's on that screen? Sophia trembled. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then slowly reached for his ring finger. I was ready to spend my entire life protecting you, he said bitterly. But it turns out the woman I was about to marry is nothing but a fraud. He pulled off his wedding ring and threw it to the floor. The sharp sound of metal hitting marble echoed through the silent ballroom. Sophia gasped, stumbling backward as if she was about to collapse. But no one cared anymore. The crowd had already begun murmuring, some guests discreetly leaving their tables while others exchanged knowing glances. I took a step back, watching as everything Sophia had built crumbled right in front of her. Sophia stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom. Her engagement ring lay abandoned at her feet, reflecting the golden light of the chandelier above. But no one picked it up. Tears welled in her eyes, but no one cared anymore. Daniel had left. The perfect wedding she had spent years crafting had collapsed in a single night. The room was in chaos. Some guests rushed to leave while others stood transfixed, their faces filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. Whispers of the Morelli family's involvement in financial fraud and medical malpractice spread like wildfire. Margaret, my mother, desperately tried to keep her composure, but I could see her hands shaking as she clutched her expensive handbag, as if holding onto it tightly would somehow restore her world to what it once was. Don't listen to her, Margaret suddenly shrieked, her voice losing all control. She's always been jealous, always trying to destroy this family. I smiled, stepping closer to her, my voice soft but sharp. Is that so? Then why don't we call the IRS? Or maybe the hospital where Sophia supposedly works. I'm sure they'd love to hear about this. The truth was, they already knew. Just as I finished speaking, a loud ringing cut through the air. Richard, my father, hurriedly pulled his phone from his suit pocket. His face had already been tense, but as soon as he glanced at the screen, his expression completely drained of color. Morelli Family Care Clinic was calling. He rejected the call, but only seconds later another voice spoke up from the crowd. Dr. Collins, a well-known physician from the hospital, took a step forward. His voice was grave. Richard, The hospital is requesting your immediate presence. Dr. Collins' voice was firm as he looked at my father, his eyes filled with suspicion. They've just uncovered multiple forged prescriptions under Sophia's name. All of them are tied to your clinic. A new wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sophia immediately shook her head in panic. No, I didn't do anything. Someone must have forged my name, she screamed, her voice trembling. But no one believed her anymore. And then, right at that moment, the doors to the ballroom swung open. 2 police officers stepped inside. The entire room fell silent, holding its breath. I wasn't the one who called them, but I knew that once the truth was exposed, someone would act before I even had to. One of the officers stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. Richard Morelli, you need to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of financial fraud and insurance malpractice. I glanced at my father. For the first time in my life, I saw true fear in his eyes. This is a mistake, he tried to argue, but no one believed him anymore. Sophia burst into tears, rushing to grab his arm. Dad, do something. They can't take us away like this. Dad, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Sophia, did you really think he was the only one involved in this? One of the officers turned to Sophia, then spoke. Miss Morelli, we will also need you to come in for questioning regarding the falsification of medical credentials. Sophia completely broke down. No, I didn't do anything, she screamed, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. But no one came to help her. Margaret turned to her daughter, then to her husband, as if desperately searching for someone to salvage the situation. But then, she realized it was over. Some guests quietly slipped out. Others pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle as it unfolded. The Morelli family's reputation, the legacy my mother had spent her life protecting, was crumbling before her very eyes. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with hatred. You destroyed this family. I let out a soft chuckle, my expression unshaken. No, Mother, I said evenly. You all destroyed yourselves a long time ago. I just made sure the world saw the truth. Richard lowered his head, saying nothing as the officers secured handcuffs around his wrists. Sophia continued sobbing, begging in vain. But no one cared anymore. And me? I just stood there, watching everything fall apart. Calm, proud, and with absolutely no regrets. Richard was escorted out of the ballroom in silence. The crowd parted to let the officers pass, but no one spoke up to defend him. His entire life he had been the one in control, the one making all the decisions. But in this moment, all the power he once held had vanished in a single night. Sophia knelt on the floor, her trembling hands clutching at her expensive wedding gown, now stained by the ruins of her own downfall. Once a perfect princess, she was now nothing more than a broken woman, exposed in front of everyone. She had no fiancé, no dignity, and most importantly, no one left to believe in her. Margaret, my mother, stood frozen. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to do something, to say something that could turn the situation around, but for the first time in her life, she realized that she no longer had control over anything. I took a step forward, facing the man who once declared that I was unworthy of being part of this family. Richard lifted his head to look at me, his expression filled with resentment. You think you've won? His voice was hoarse, thick with anger. You're nothing but a traitor. I never considered you my daughter. The entire ballroom fell silent. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. But I simply stood there, calm and composed, as if I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. I leaned down slightly, looking him straight in the eye. Your family was lost a long time ago. You just never realized it. Not a hint of rage, not a trace of sorrow. I spoke the words as if they were nothing more than facts, and the truth was, they were. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw it. There was no one left on his side. He had destroyed everything with his own hands. Margaret clutched her designer handbag tightly, her face pale. She glanced around, as if searching for someone still loyal to the Morelli family, but everyone had turned their backs on them. The guests who once praised them, the colleagues who once respected them, now only wary stares and hushed whispers remained. Sophia let out a quiet sob. "Catherine, you can't do this to me." I turned to look at her. For the first time tonight, her voice was no longer sharp, no longer filled with mockery. Instead, it was drenched in desperation. "You did this to yourself, Sophia," I said softly but firmly. She collapsed further, unable to argue. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp night air fill my lungs. I had done what I came here to do. A warm hand rested on my back. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, the man who had always stood by me, the one person whose loyalty I had never doubted. "Let's go, Catherine," he said gently, but I could hear the pride in his voice. I gave a slight nod. There was nothing left here for me. We walked out of the ballroom, passing curious stares and hushed murmurs, but no one dared to stop me. I was no longer the weak girl they had so easily cast aside. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around me like a soft embrace. I exhaled slowly, feeling as if I had just set down a weight I had carried for over a decade. Ethan opened the car door for me, but before stepping in, I realized there was one more thing I wanted to do before this night ended. I turned to him, my eyes gleaming with a spontaneous idea. "Ethan, do you want to get some cake?" He blinked, momentarily surprised by my question, but then a smile quickly spread across his face. "Cake?" He chuckled. "Absolutely. We have something to celebrate, after all." I laughed, feeling a lightness spread through me, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had truly freed myself. We drove to a small bakery on the corner of the street, its warm golden light spilling through the windows. I ordered a slice of red velvet cake, while Ethan got a piece of cheesecake. I picked up my fork, cutting into the cake and taking a bite. The sweetness melted on my tongue instantly, but the best part was knowing that I could finally enjoy it, without any burden weighing on me. Ethan watched me, his gaze filled with warmth. "How do you feel now?" he asked. I took a sip of my tea, letting its slight bitterness linger for a moment. Then I set my cup down and smiled. Free. That was my real victory. Not the downfall of the Morelli family, not the exposure of their secrets, but the fact that, at last, I was no longer bound by my past. Catherine's story is not just about reclaiming justice. It's a powerful lesson on freedom and self-worth. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who turn their backs on us first. But what truly matters is not how we are abandoned, but how we rise again. Catherine never sought revenge. She only demanded fairness and proved that a person's worth is not defined by those who discard them, but by how they rebuild their own life. And that is the true victory. What do you think of Catherine's story? If you were in her situation, how would you have faced it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.